again, it's Tuppence. Welcome to my channel. I'm going to start on my Christmas gifts. Yeah, I know it seems really early, but summer is done, and although I'm looking forward to autumn and Halloween projects, it's never really too early to start on Christmas gifts or making things to sell at Christmas fairs. So I'm going to make something very similar to something I made last year. I used this rose lidded pot. This is the rose that sits on the top there. I used an Ecoresin Aqua cast to create a scent stone just using the lid. And this is what I created. You pop your aromatherapy oils on there, and it's got some perlite in the back to give it extra absorbency. I'll leave a link to the video up there. For this one, I also made a coaster out of Aqua cast and some air dry clay. It gives the rose something to sit on and protects your surfaces from any of the oil that you put on top of the rose. And I think this makes a lovely gift. So I want to make something very similar, only this time I'm going to be using the whole of the pot. So I will use Aqua cast in the lid, and that will create my scent stone. And I'll also make two little scent stones that I can put in the pot, and I'm going to make that out of resin. So I'll pop that to the side, and I'm just going to work on these first. And as these are going to be our scent stones, I need to mix up some Aqua cast. I'm going to use Aqua cast Turbo, but you can use any of the eco resins. It's down to personal choice. So I need to mix up enough for the scent stone that is going to go on top of our pot, and these can be small scent stones and they can fit inside the pot, and you can pop those into drawers or hang them up in your wardrobes, anything you want to do with those. Alright, let me go mix up my Aqua cast. I'm not sure exactly how much I'm going to need for these moulds, so I'm just going to mix up 100 grams of the powder, and that's 40 grams of water that I need for that. Aqua cast Turbo is extremely quick. It cures within about 15 minutes, and you have a pretty short working life with it. So I do need to be speedy. So if I need to mix up any more, that's fine. I'll just make these in small batches. So that's my powder now, and I've already measured out my 40 grams of water. I'm going to mix the two together. And I like to put the powder into the water. I find it just mixes much easier. So I'm going to mix my powder a little bit at a time, but I'm not going to hang around. I really want to get this mixed up pretty quickly, making sure that there are no lumps and no raw powder left in there. And once I have this mixed up and it's nice and smooth, I'm going to add a very small amount of water, just enough to cover the surface. I want this to be a little bit more fluid than normal, as my moulds are quite intricate. So you do have a little bit of leeway as to how thick or thin you make up your Aqua cast. However, you don't want to overdo it, otherwise it will just take so long to harden and cure, and it may become very weak. This I think is fine. So I'm just going to make a little spout on my pot and start to pour this into the lid. Now I may not have enough, but that's okay. I can mix a little bit more up in a minute. So I'm just pouring enough to cover those rose petals at the bottom, and then I'm going to tap this up and down on my table, trying to dislodge any bubbles that might be stuck into those petals. Then I'm going to take a microbrush stick, and I'm just going to run that along the inside of those dips and cavities, encouraging any bubbles to come out. Now I need to fill this up. The top of this mould has quite a sharp overhang, and I'm definitely going to get bubbles trapped under there. So once I have this filled up past that point, I need to make sure I give this a really good tap and shimmy, just to encourage any of the bubbles out from underneath that area. I didn't have quite enough, so I've just mixed up a little bit more, and I can top that up and give that a tap to level it, and then I'll set that aside and I can fill in these. I'm going to add a little bit more water, as this is still slightly too thick, and then I can mix that around. So these are very small moulds and they're really quite intricate. Well, I've overfilled that a little bit, so I'm just going to try and tip some of that into my other mould. And then I'm going to take the microbrush stick, and again I'm going to scrape along the bottom, the same as I did with the larger pot. And you can see as I'm doing that there are bubbles rising up. They would become trapped into the bottom if I'd let that set, and the rose would not look perfect. I'm going to try and clean the mould up now. I'm taking a paper towel and just wiping off any of the excess. The cleaner I can get it now, the less work I'm going to have to do later. Then I can fill and do the same to the other one, and I can set these aside to cure. And I'm going to take that same stick and I'll run this along the inside edge of the rose lid, trying to dislodge any bubbles just before this cures. You can see it's already starting to thicken up, but I'll do my best to scrape anything out, then I'll even out the top, and I'll be back in half an hour once these have had time to cure. Okay, I am ready to demold, and I do have a bubble and some rough surface here, but I'll sand that so I'm not worried. The bubbles that are most important are the ones that might be on the petals or here. I do have one on the edge of the lip, but I'm not worried about that. I can deal with that afterwards. So I just want to fold back the edges here, releasing the seal, and once I get this clear of most of that lip, I should be able to pull it back and get it over the petals. I'm turning the mould inside out, and then I can pull that clear of the petals. I do need to be a bit careful though, because this is not at full strength until 24 hours afterwards. But that looks great. I can't see any bubbles apart from the ones on the bottom, and most of those I'm going to deal with by sanding. The one on the edge, I'll show you how to deal with that. Just prop that on there while I demold these. And that looks really good, no bubbles there. And that is good also. Alright, now I'm going to deal with the bubbles, and before I deal with that, I need to give this a sand. I'm sanding off the rough area where the water has evaporated from the mould. I'm just using sandpaper that you would for woodwork, and I'm doing it while this is still damp because it's soft at the moment. I'm going to gather up all that dust, brush off the excess, and that is much smoother already. I will give this a coat of UV resin once this has dried out. Right, I want to use some of this dust, so I'm going to try and scrape some off of this sandpaper, although it is damp, so it's kind of made a paste. I might get some. Let's gather that up into a little pile. And I want to use this to colour what I'm going to use to fill, which is some air dry clay. This is Das clay, and I've just put my scraps into this pot and mixed it with some water to make a clay slip. And I'm going to mix that with the dust that I've just got from the sanding, and that will help to colour that. Air dry clay does tend to go quite pale, but it's not going to be the same colour as the Aqua cast. If you can mix in some dust, it does help. And of course, if you're going to paint it, it's not really an issue. But if you're not going to paint something, then I suggest that you just mix up a tiny bit more of the Aqua cast and fill in your holes then. Alright, if you've ever filled in a hole in a wall, it's much the same. I'm just going to lay this in and overfill my hole, and then once this is dry, I can sand this back. That will be okay, I think. I don't really care if it's rough. Once this is dried, I can sand everything back smooth, and you're not even going to know that it's been there. Now it's time to work on the pot. This design has some embossed leaves along the bottom edge, and I want to colour those, so I'm going to push the centre through so that I can access them. That way I don't get colour anywhere else. I'm using some of this green chrome powder from Let's Resin, and I'm going to use a soft makeup brush to apply it. So if I just press the pot against the table and pull the top back, I can access the leaf and colour them in. I'm going to use the brush to polish in the colour and make sure that there isn't any loose powder. I only want the green powder to be on the leaves. So if I get some anywhere else, I'm going to take some isopropyl alcohol and a cotton bud, and I can wipe that away. Then I need to leave that to dry before I turn my mould back the right way, popping that centre through. And if I get any green on it accidentally, I can take the same cotton bud, isopropyl alcohol, and clean that off. Now it's time to make up the pot, and I've got this on my Resiners curing machine mat, and that way I won't have to move it once I fill it up. And this is 5 ounces of craft resin that I have mixed up. Well, my Resiners dual head mixer mixed it up, and to that I'm going to add some of this pearl mica. So I'm going to put a couple of generous scoops in there. And because this was mixed up by my machine, I'm going to make sure that I scrape the bottom and the sides as I'm mixing this mica in. That way, any resin that might have been missed by the machine, I will incorporate. And that's going to give me a nice pearly white base colour, because I want to add something else for the petals. The top of the pot has petals which form the outside of the rose. So I'm going to put some of this white into another cup, and then I can add some colour into that. I'm not really sure how much I'm going to need. They are pretty deep, but any colour I put in the bottom will migrate up the pot anyway. I'm going to use this fuchsia alcohol ink from Sigwong. I'll put a couple of drops in. That's probably about 4. And then mix that in, and this should give me a lovely pearly pink. I don't want this to touch the green or the sides of the pot, so I'm going to pour on the top of this dome, and then hopefully it will just trickle down the sides and into the bottom without touching any of that green or the outside of the mould. I do it slowly. And it looks like I've got just about enough. So I'm very gently going to pick this up and squidge the edge of those petals. Again, I don't want to push this up too high because I don't want it to touch the sides. But as I say, when I pour the next colour in, the white, that will migrate up the pot anyway. Okay, so again, I will pour the rest of this resin onto the middle of that dome and see how far we go. And it looks like I might need to mix up a little bit more. That'll be okay because I'm only using the one colour, so I don't have to colour match anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix up a little bit more, then I can top that up and I will see you back here for demould. Well, this is nice and cured now, and I can see that I've got a lovely gradation of colour down the side. So I just need to break the seal and pull this away from the edges of the mould, and it looks pretty clean. It looks like I've got nice distinct leaves. So I'm going to fold this back, and I'm not going to tell you that it's the easiest mould to demould. It really isn't. But once you manage to pull this back and get it off of one of the petals, it is much easier. So you can fold it all the way inside out, and then once you've got it clear of the petals, you just twist to pull the centre out. And that looks really pretty. I'm very happy with that. That's not a bubble, that is a little dot for the lid to locate. So I do have a tiny micro bubble there. I can fill that with UV resin. I'm just going to fold my mould back through the right way so that it doesn't become deformed. I really love the way that pink has blended into that white, and you can got these nice crisp green leaves. Very, very pretty. This has only just come out of the curing machine, so it's still a little soft and needs to harden, and I am waiting on the top to continue drying before I can paint it. So I'm going to set this aside to continue cooling down, and by the time the top is ready to paint, this should also be ready. Okay, it is 24 hours later and I can paint this now. I want to try and match this colour. I'm never going to get it exactly the same because this does have a pearlescent powder in it, and I'm not going to use that on the lid, but I do want to match the colour, so I'm going to use the same fuchsia alcohol ink. However, I want this to go on very watercolour, so I'm going to use some isopropyl alcohol. This will not only dilute it, but also it means that because that evaporates very quickly, it's not going to make the lid wet again. We've already waited 24 hours for this to dry. I don't want to make it really wet. I'm just going to swirl that to mix it, and then I've got this nice flat fluffy brush and I'm going to use that just to paint the colour on. And I want some texture and shades of colour. I don't want this to be flat, so I'm just going to have fun and paint this. There are some areas that haven't taken the colour very well and they're too white, so I'm going to use some neat alcohol ink and brush that on, creating some more texture. Alright, that's looking good. I'm going to try it against the pot and see what it looks like. And I think that colour matches well. So obviously it's matte and the rest of the pot isn't, but that's fine. I'm just using the brush and I've got a little pool of alcohol on the table and I'm dipping that back into the ink, trying to add a little bit more definition by darkening the tips of the petals. But you kind of got to know when to stop, and I think that's probably going to be it. So I'm just going to let that alcohol evaporate off, and then I can add a coat of this UV resin on the back. I'm going to swirl it onto the back and just use my glove to spread this out. And then I'm going to pop this underneath my UV lamp to cure, and I'm going to let it cure for a good 5 minutes. All that's left now is to package this nicely. I've got some scent stones, some painted and some not. I'll pop those into the pot themselves. If you can find a small enough essential oil, you can put that in there too, or just leave that. Now I can put the lid on, and I've printed out a couple of tags, and I had my Cricut right on this one. It says, "The lid of this pot is a scent stone. Add a few drops of your favourite scent and refresh as needed." And I've made these so that I can thread the wrap that I've got here through them. So this is an Iridescent Florist wrap, and I'm going to scrunch that up around the pot and grab it all together at the top. Then I will take one of those tags and thread that through the hole, snug that down, and this is what's going to hold this together. Once I've got that through, it just takes a little bit of wriggling. You can kind of twist and gently push down the tag until you get that near the bottom. You can always reinforce the hole on the tag, but I did this out of pretty heavy cardstock, so it's okay as long as you're gentle. And then that will hold that gift wrap in place. I can do the same with the other one. So I'm just going to twist this, make it much smaller and tighter. Then I can thread that tag on, and that will have the instructions. Of course, you can always put somebody's name, you know, a message on there, whatever you want really. And I think that looks super cute. You can either cut this or just leave it as it is and fan it out. I think this would make a really great gift to give to somebody, or even to sell at a craft fair. You can pair it with someone's favourite scent or leave it up to them to decide. Well, I hope you've liked this video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, comment, share, subscribe if you haven't. It's free. There's a QR code on the screen. If you scan that, you'll be able to come back and see what I'm going to make next time. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.